Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well and having a blessed week. My name is Jack Teroni, and I'm the pastor here at Faith United Methodist Church in the Stroudsburg area. And this is Faith Talks, where we're once again diving into some of the most important and pressing questions about our faith, specifically our Christian faith. We're trying to understand our relationship with God and with Jesus and with church a little bit better today. And again, I pray that that's a reality for you. If you're watching this, maybe, in the midst of exploring what you believe and what your faith in God is calling you to do, then I pray that this video and others might be a guiding light for you. And if you're looking for, answers, I pray that these videos might provide some answers for you in an effort to, build your faith a little better. That's what we're trying to do. And that's the point of me making these videos. And again, I hope that that's a reality for you. Today, I have an interesting topic to talk about for our faith talks, and it actually is in response to something that is currently happening in the news and has been kind of making waves over social media for the past couple days. It is the idea of the rapture, right? And we're going to talk about that and what it means. So, people out there, especially probably the younger people, the younger generation, the my age and maybe younger, you've probably seen it on TikTok or other places online referencing it. The claim that the rapture is going to happen in 2025, specifically right around the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah, which marks the start of the new Jewish year, kind of the end of one year and the beginning of another. It's a very, a very deeply devotional holiday for Judaism and everything. But this claim that the rapture was coming specifically yesterday on September 23rd was made by a South African preacher. And he had made this prophecy about him, having a vision of Jesus, and it kind of spread like wildfire on social media. And people are talking, some people are worrying, even making plans around it, plans like selling off all of their possessions and everything. And while, parts of the Bible do call us to do that, I'm not sure if it's exactly in this context, but I'll elaborate more on that later. With all of this in the news and everything, I thought it'd be maybe a good opportunity for us to look a little bit deeper about, how the term rapture came about, its origins and everything, and more specifically, are we to believe in it the same way that it's being portrayed on TikTok and other social media? So, I thought, especially since I got some questions from some of our congregants here at Faith about it, just not necessarily that they're, crazy concerned about it or, or worried or fearful, but more so, how do we respond to it? How do we react as, faithful Christians and everything? I felt like, well, might be a good opportunity for us to dive into a little bit about its origins and where it came from. So, let's do that. So the word rapture, let's start here. The word rapture doesn't actually appear in the Bible. Some will be surprised to learn. The idea actually comes from a Latin translation of the Greek word harpazo. Harpazo is how I pronounce it, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I didn't plug it into Google Speech real quick before I do. I like to do that so I make sure I'm pronouncing words correctly. But the Greek word is harpazo, and you know what harpazo means? It means to be caught up. To be, in modern English language, it would be to be caught up in something, right? That's kind of how the term has, found its roots in the Latin language. And it is, found the harpazo word, not necessarily rapture, but harpazo is found in First Thessalonians 4. So Paul, the Apostle Paul, is talking about it. And actually, over time, some Christians began to teach that uh, there would be this moment, a kind of, snap moment, spontaneous moment where believers in Jesus or God would suddenly vanish, but would be, as they described it in the old terms, not necessarily gone instantly to heaven, but pulled up into the sky to meet Jesus, which is kind of, how we interpret going to heaven and everything. While others, those non-believers, would be left behind. And so, that's kind of been, and it's been depicted in, multiple kinds of entertainment and, writings and stories and novels. One of them was Left Behind. It's a very popular book, and I believe they wrote about three of them that came out somewhere in the 80s or 90s. I'm not exactly sure of the date, but it's an interesting book, and I've read the first one, which is called Left Behind. And again, as I said, there are two more sequels. Left Behind was adapted into a feature film some years ago, starring Nicolas Cage and some others, which I did watch, and I thought it was very interesting. So it's an interesting thing to check out. But what the important thing that I think we should, take away, or the point of the message that I'm going to tell you today, is that even though for most of Christian history, you know, the church never taught this version of the rapture. For most of Christian history, the version of the rapture that we're, hearing about probably on social media, on TikTok, and specifically they're calling it rapture talk, right? Um, or some of the depictions in some of these books like I just mentioned, it's not necessarily depicted that way in the church teaching, right? The Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the historic faith, all of them kind of speak not about believers just up and disappearing, but the about the resurrection of the dead, the return of Christ, and the renewal of all creation. Those are the things that the church highlights and teaches about, holds close to its doctrine, polity, theology, whatever you want to define it as. It is the resurrection of the dead, the return of Christ, grace for all from God, and the renewal of all the world, right? That's what we teach, at least here at Faith United Methodist Church and churches that I know and have grown up in and been a part of, right? The modern idea of the rapture only really took off in, I would say, the 1800s, and it was a preacher named John Nelson Darby, who kind of was talking about this, snap moment where others, were being brought up instantly to heaven, and those who were non-believing were left behind to watch, the end times of the earth. And, he kind of popularized it in his call for all to accept Jesus into their hearts and to come and find faith of some kind. And he made the argument that non-believers would be left, with, less faith in the world, or a less devoted life. And there were some good arguments in there, but the overall idea of the rapture to kind of inspire people to take Christianity seriously was kind of his message. And you can decide for yourself whether you find meaning in that, if that has value to you in your life. But in my understanding of it, it was kind of the Scofield Reference Bible, popularized it in America, and then the books and the movies, like Left Behind, kind of spread through modern culture, and they kind of took away from the original teachings of that resurrection of the dead, and the belief that God's grace is for all, and that we can all be forgiven, and the renewal of the world is and will be when Jesus returns. So when we hear about the rapture, it's the more you research, I think the more you kind of come across the conclusion that it's more about a 19th century idea and not necessarily biblical Christianity. But some preachers, some historians, some theologians disagree with that. So one thing I want to mention too is the Bible certainly does talk about Jesus returning, moments like this, the rapture just kind of takes people instantly to heaven and everything. But what the Bible does say time and time again, whether it's, prophesized in, the Old Testament with the prophets and everything, or, it's come to us in the flesh in the form of Jesus in the New Testament, the Bible and, the works of the Apostle Paul and laying the foundations of Christianity. The Bible certainly talks about Jesus returning. The Apostle Paul said, or referenced many times, believers will meet Christ in the air. But in the Greco-Roman world, when a king came to visit, or anyone really of high notoriety or importance, citizens went out to welcome him and then escorted him back into the city. Those are just kind of, ethics of a king in their visits, or their presence, right? Paul's words aren't necessarily about an escape plan like a rapture would be. They're about welcoming back Christ to reign over a renewed earth, let's just say. That Christ is meant to be welcomed and carried like a king, and that we are meant to welcome him and accept him into our hearts and follow him because what his word means is good. And Christ is the only one who can embody that sense of a king. Some people on earth try, but they are none compared to Jesus, right? That's essentially a message of the Bible too, right? The prophets spoke of a Messiah who would bring uh, peace and justice. Revelations paints a picture of heaven, descending to earth, not necessarily believers fleeing from it. Scripture consistently points toward resurrection, renewal, and restoration, not escape. Even if in Revelation some of that restoration is, a bit, um, shall we say, uh, indifferent or violent, even sometimes. It's interesting to read the Revelations. I hope to, in the future years, do a whole sermon series here at Faith on Revelations. But the core thing also I want you guys to know too, is that, Jesus warns against date setting. I'm going to say that again. Jesus warns against date setting. He tells us in the New Testament not to set a specific date for, anything like Rapture or Judgment Day or necessarily anything that could, cause an instant end or new time for the world, right? In Matthew 25:13, he says, "Therefore, keep watch because you do not know the day or the hour." And so if we take that, command literally, as I believe we should, he's saying, do not get so wrapped up in this idea of, the judgment day being tomorrow or setting a specific date because it could get blown. I assume he would, he's inferring that it could get so blown out of proportion that you forget that your main mission is to love and to devote more time to worshiping God and serving the world in the name of God or in my name too, right? So therefore keep watch because you do not know the day or the hour. And so again, if we take that, command literally from Jesus, that would kind of work against this idea of this rapture that's going on, or predicted for this month of, this year in 2025, and, kind of going against the ideas of rapture talk is, essentially it. That's the key message. When people set dates, they always end in disappointment because God has made it clear it will be unexpected, unknown, and at a time we cannot predict. This is now the day after this supposed rapture was going to end. And so now, as a faith leader, I'm looking to this preacher who I don't doubt has, a wonderful heart for God and is trying to encourage people to take the Bible seriously and everything and take the words of Jesus seriously. I don't doubt that he is that, but I would now question him and say, was this vision you had perhaps in related to something else? Or, was this legitimate, or was this just something that you felt happened to you, right? And then from there, kind of religious leaders lose their, I was like, they kind of, let's just be real about it. Religious leaders kind of lose their authority or influence when they make certain claims that later turn out to be not true. And so many people have different questions about that. And it's not just about, rapture or anything. It can be about a multitude of things. So, we have to approach the beliefs we have, the visions that we believe we have humbly, right? And respond when we know that it's something to be done out of love and care that will better this world in the name of Christ. That's what I would say, and that's how I would respond to that South African preacher who, believes that he had this vision, right? So, in the end, I will say this. There's one thing I want you to take away. It's this: God has made clear that the time of judgment will be unexpected, unknown, and at a time that we cannot predict. And what does Paul say in Thessalonians? Like a thief in the night. So be prepared for that by loving your neighbor, by caring about what Jesus commands, and so that's what I think we should take away. I want to talk a little bit about the United Methodist perspective. This church here at Faith is a United Methodist church. As United Methodists, it says this in a lot of our doctrine and polity. It says, we affirm what Christians throughout history have believed, that Christ, the holy mystery, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. We don't believe necessarily in a secret rapture. We believe in the final resurrection and the renewal of all creation, right? That means our hope isn't in, escaping this earth like a rapture. It means God transforming the world, right? Our job isn't to guess days on the calendar, right? But um, to live faithfully and loving God and loving our neighbor every day we are given, like I said, right? Now, some people I know, I want to say this too, because I've read watched several videos from pastors who are doing a lot of making a lot of connections with current events, right? I know many people look at world events, right? Wars, disasters, political turmoil, right? And see signs of the end times, and I've also this last year, I think the biggest thing that I've heard some preachers talk about is the siege in Gaza and the current problems with the Israel-Palestine conflict as proof that the end was coming. Why? Because, well, for Christianity and many religions, that is a holy land, that is a sacred space for us, and to see it engulfed in war and devastation like we're seeing right now in Israel, with the terrible attacks of, a couple of years ago, and now, all the problems in Gaza. Some people, see this as a sign of the end times. But to that, I would say Jesus told us that wars and rumors of wars would always be with us, right? They are reminders of our need for God, not a timetable for the world's end. If anything, these events call us to deeper compassion because we see these horrible things. We need to be in deeper prayer. We need to show more compassion and more urgent actions for peace, right? In his, Sermon on the Mount, one of the greatest sermons ever preached, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God, right? And so, I heard a pastor write this somewhere else. He was an Episcopal. He was an Episcopal minister. He said this, and I think it's really important. So he said, "So here's the real question when it comes to all this rapture stuff. If tomorrow is not guaranteed, how will we live today?" I like that a lot. The truth is, none of us really knows the day or the hour, not just of Christ's return, but even of our own lives. Each breath, each sunrise, we need to remember is a beautiful gift and to not waste it, right? A lot of times I talk to our congregation here at Faith and I say, we are called in the Psalms to, number our days, not necessarily counting down the days we have left on this earth or until we grow old, and not necessarily to count them down like on a calendar, but to remember that we are only here for so long on this earth in the flesh. Serve God and love neighbor and do all the good you can in all the ways you can for as long as you ever can, as the Methodist founder John Wesley would say, right? So, that let's shift the conversation to that. The point isn't to worry about this rapture talk or 2025, the end is going to, end, right? The point is, how are we going to honor God in love today? How would you answer that question right now? How have you honored God in love today, friends? Have you seen someone at work or at school or, in public, wherever, and said, "Hey, thank you. Have a nice day. Just want you to know you're awesome." Maybe even go so far as to say, "I love you," right? Not necessarily, not necessarily in a romantic way, but in a neighbor loving way. Say, I'm rooting for you, my man, or "I'm with you," right? I know I'm making a joke out of myself here, but I'm serious, right? How will we live as if every moment matters? How will we treat our neighbor, care for creation, lift up the broken, and shine God's light in this world? That's what I think the conversation really needs to be shifted towards. Away from this idea of we're going to set a date and oh, this is when it's going to happen. The rapture is going to happen. We're all going to, the believers will be pulled up to heaven. Oh my goodness, the end times of the earth are coming. I don't want you guys so much to focus on that kind of thing. If anything, let it be, if you're going to, believe in those kinds of immediate moments, let it be let it be a constant motivator for you to do the good you can, to do all the good you possibly can. Because one thing is certain, Christ will come again. That's our holy mystery, what I said before. And when he does, I don't want him to find us staring, at our phones or scrolling through all these crazy predictions and getting all, worked up and, only more fearful and everything. That's not what I want Christ to see, me personally. I want him to see us living faithfully, loving deeply, and working for, a better kingdom here and now on earth as it is in heaven, like it says in our prayer. So if you hear someone predicting the rapture for 2025 or another time really anytime soon or any year, I just want you to you don't necessarily have to accept what I've said today, but I want you to remember the words of Jesus, and those words are, "You do not know the day or the hour." We're not going to waste our energy on, dates and speculations. We're going to live each and every day as a gift, honoring God in love, trusting that when Christ does return, he's going to make all things new. And as they say in our church, Maranatha. That means come, Lord Jesus. And that's all I have to say for you today. That's what I want you to think about when you see all this rapture talk and everything. Think about how you can live a more loving and honorable life. Maybe you already do, but there's always ways to improve, friends. That's the journey. That's the journey towards sanctification, as we Methodists call it. Let's do that and serve in a loving, caring way. Why don't I share a prayer for us as we go? Lord, I thank you for the gift of each day, the gift of every sunrise that comes up, the gift of every moon that lights up the night sky and allows us to see the stars and all the beauty of this universe that you have made for us. Truly a cosmic God you are, and we remember how little and small we are, but how great an impact we can make if we love each other and work together. Encourage us to do that, Lord, instead of looking at these dates and, getting swept up in this rapture stuff and, selling things that we should not sell or doing things that we should not do, because we fear the end of this time. Help us to ground ourselves in the words of your Son, Jesus, and say that when that time does come and he returns here on earth and that judgment day happens, that we can look him in the eyes with so much love and all the glory and light that he is, and say we loved our neighbor as ourselves, that we clothed the naked, that we fed the hungry, that we loved our neighbor as ourselves. Bless us as we go from this place to walk the walk and talk the talk in the name of the one who gave himself up so that we might be able to do so. And now I pray the prayer in his name that he taught us to pray so long ago, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Friends, I hope that this video was meaningful to you in some way. I hope maybe you learned something, you were taught something new, something you didn't know before, and you'll continue to think about how to take your faith seriously each and every day. Go out and serve your neighbor and love them just as Christ loved you. And remember that God loves you, and so do I. So do we as Christians. Go from this place and, stop watching this video and go do a good thing for someone else. Go and sit and share a moment of prayer, either by yourself or maybe with people that you love and care about. And go just do a good deed for the day in the name of Christ. And let's continue to build on that together, build on our faith more and more. And if you have more questions about faith and you want to grow deeper in that, please let me know. Share your questions, and I will try and comment on them or do a video about them or answer them in some other way. Let's continue to build together. With all that shared, blessings and keep the faith. Bye bye.